question about previously was that you had made no notation in the, or the notes that you gave to us from that meeting, that the overhead charges for the federal, for the Corps were very high, and I looked at the budget, and it does seem like they're really high. Did they explain that?
Not very well. I mean, and everyone who's been attending these meetings from all 5 agencies has been seemingly distressed that so much is going for overhead. For example, if you look at the chart, which is on attachment 3, we're looking at $300,000 for plan formulation, and really, so far in 3 years, we've received 1 or 2 charts. No significant study has been completed, and there's a degree of consternation. And so I come back to, I want you to think about how we can come up with $250,000 over the next 3 years for the feasibility study if Mike Thompson and/or the Corps are not very excited about the project.
Well, for example, that what I was looking at when I looked at it was the cost for the project archival document review, $114,000 to look at documents. That just seems really outrageous, and the federal overhead cost is $73,000. I mean, I don't know, based on these numbers, I don't know very much about it, but it sounds really exorbitant to me for what we're going to get.
Oh, it's tremendously exorbitant. And the question is, what alternatives are there? The question is, how much growth do we project with the Ukiah Valley Area Plan when it's finally adopted? Can we provide water for that growth in a newly adopted Ukiah Valley Area Plan without major new storage? Now, I haven't had time to review this, but this council adopted in November of 2007 an urban water management plan that says we don't need to be concerned at all. So, well, to me, I'm nervous about the project, considering that the pessimistic nature of Dave Doak and the overhead that we're paying for and not getting any results. Councilmember Thomas.
I think there's another piece of this perception held by those of us who've been in attendance at these meetings, is that the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't need us very much. And we're putting in a whole lot of our chips onto this table, and when they match us, that's a tiny fraction. So their investment in this particular project, relative to the much bigger projects that they are undertaking, we're not at the top of their list on that sort of scale, which doesn't mean that they would blow it off, but it does, I think, and this was agreed, there was general agreement on this, including from Mike Dillabaugh, that it's hard for us to get an awful lot of access on a consistent basis with the Army Corps of Engineers in carrying out what we need them to do.
It seems like we're talking about water storage and flood control. Are we talking about both those things, right? So we're trying to find out ways to have more water and not have too much water be a problem.
But the primary motive of the Army Corps is prevention of floods. They really are not, their primary motive has nothing to do with providing more storage.
But more storage would assist us by having a higher dam would give us more storage so that we would have more even access to water throughout the year. Is that correct?
Right. But in terms of in terms of the Army Corps determining feasibility, that it provides more water for this valley is somewhat irrelevant and has nothing to do with it, whether they decide it's feasible.
Well, you just mentioned the Ukiah Valley Area Plan. That's why I was talking about it in terms of, you know, spurring growth or, you know, or not. And also I think about the dam and where it's located, and we have a lot of houses in the way of it. You know, if it breaks or if it doesn't have sufficient capacity to hold back water when there is a lot of water. So flood control probably is an important thing because we've built in floodplain there. But where my thought was going, and I have a very unsophisticated understanding of all the many issues, but what Councilmember Crane said about getting people downriver to collaborate with each other just totally makes sense to me, and figure out how to use the water we have well to meet everybody's needs when it's too much water or too little water. I mean, it's such a sensible response, rather than $114,000 on archival review of documents and other things that are being proposed in order to get the project off the ground. So I'm leery of the project's expenditures.
Okay, I will relay that. Councilmember Rudden?
Yeah, I feel the same way. It seems like it's a black hole, and of, you know, putting our money into this feasibility study, and Mr. Crane mentioned two very, seems reasonable and relatively inexpensive possible, you know, alternatives. One being that, you know, if the Potter Valley, if that new, you know, regimen happens and the feds take over control, we won't have to pay for it at all. And the other issue that he mentioned, which was, you know, changing the proportion of flood versus conservation. I mean, seems like those ought to definitely be explored before we continue to put our money into this. But I also haven't talked to a lot of people about this issue, so I would be curious to hear alternative points of view on the issue.
Well, I'm curious why the suggestion of changing the determination of what water is which, that it hasn't come up at the Inland Water and Power Commission or being mentioned by the director of the Flood Control District, to me, makes me wonder if it's easier said than done.
Always.
And, but there is a hope, I think, that the Round Valley Indian Tribe proposal will somehow create a miracle and the federal government would come in, because there's no reason in allowing more water to come from the Eel into the East Fork of the Russian unless there's more holding capacity in the lake. So
It wouldn't be more.
yeah, yes, there would.
I have a question. Do you know anything, Mr. Marston, about this issue of flood water and conservation water and how they can be used, or if that's something that can possibly we can advocate to change?
A little bit. I mean, just in way of background, my expertise is in Indian water rights. Since 1978, I've been involved in California versus Arizona, which is a general stream adjudication of the Colorado River. And I deal with Bureau.
I don't think everyone can hear your comments.
I was just giving you some background information. And actually, I was the attorney that filed the petition to intervene in the FERC proceedings on behalf of the Covelo Indian community. That was me. To, you know, improve the fish ladder and to divert more water into the Eel River for up and out migration of salmon during critical migration times. So I know a little bit about it. You know, it really surprises me that the first of all, that the Corps can be charging you the charges that they're charging, because there had to be an original contract, and the contract has to provide what services they're going to provide and at what cost they were going to provide it. And it seems to me that if you're concerned about the costs, somebody should go back and take a look at the original contract. That's the first thing. And if the costs, if the prices seem too high for the services that are being provided, I try to reopen negotiations with the Corps over the charges that they're charging you. That's one thing. I'm also surprised that the Corps is actually, I don't know,